Spencer Dennis, welcome to Built to Sell Radio.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's cool to be with you for lots of different reasons. I'm a sports junkie, and so when I first read your bio and your background and your work with golfers, I was like, oh, I got to get Spencer on the show. So, talk to me about what you did before you were a founder of a startup. You help people with their golf, but like elite athletes.
Yeah. So the complete kind of origin story of all of this is that I played competitive soccer as a young guy, and I was on Junior Olympics. I was heading in that direction. Unfortunately, developed some pretty serious spine issues that resulted in spine surgery, a fusion when I was 14 or 15 years old, which is just real crazy. Didn't have a serious injury, but it just kind of all happened. And then for some reason started playing golf after that because it didn't hurt as bad. And then I quickly became a scratch golfer. So if anybody knows about golf, it's pretty low. And then got some college scholarships, went out and played some college golf. School wasn't really for me as this entrepreneurial guy, which we can talk about later. So I was like, I'm going to keep playing golf. And so I left school, won some tournaments as an amateur, and then turned professional, played for, sadly, a very short time because the spine stuff came back and took me out of the ability to play at that competitive level, right, where you're playing every day and doing lots of stuff. And then I got into coaching. And the coaching, I think, ultimately was really my true calling. And because I had played at a high level, I immediately landed in this high performance space. And timeline wise, this would have been 2007, 8, 9, 10, kind of right in there. And during that period, I was director of instruction at a club as I started out. And then I got recruited to work at one of those crazy academies that some of your listeners may have heard of, where the parents are paying ungodly sums for their children to go play a sport and live away from home, right? It's a sports boarding school of sorts. So mine was golf, of course. And so I lived in Florida for a while, trained all these kids, was basically their dad at the age of 22, which was also very weird. We can talk about that. But golf coach, chauffeur, stepdad, I guess, to a lot of these children from around the world. And then after I left the academy setting for a lot of different reasons, especially because it was just, I think, too intense for these kids. I couldn't really buy into how it was going. I then started coaching again on my own and working in more of the tour level. So working with elite college players, tour professionals, juniors that wanted to play in college. So always that high performance venue. And that led me to then eventually needing some technology to do that better.
Yeah. So talk about the genesis behind the app. Like you built an app for coaching golf. What was the spark?
Yeah. So the simplest version of this is that I was successful at an early age. I was in my early 20s coaching in a small town, but I was making over 6 figures. And even today, most coaches don't ever eclipse that. And we can talk very directly about that, which is kind of a bummer. So most sports coaches are making somewhere around $50,000 or less and working over 40 hours a week to accomplish that. They love it, but they haven't figured out a way to build a business around it. I had a business, but it wasn't sustainable. I was working 40 hours a week, let's say, as a coach, and then another 30, 40 hours a week sending emails and text messages and trying to hack all that content together. Because when you work in the high performance level, especially, there's a lot of stakeholders. There's their fitness coach, mental coach. There might be a college coach, mom and dad in the junior world, potential recruiters. So you get all these people involved, and now you've got this crazy game of telephone that doesn't work. And I had read a book, for anybody out there, if you haven't read it yet, I'd highly suggest it, called The Talent Code by Daniel Coyle.
Oh, I've heard of it. Yeah, I've never read it.
Yeah. Fantastic book. He's got another book called The Culture Code. Couldn't recommend them higher. But really, he talks about you need expert coaching. You need ignition. So essentially like motivation and excitement and deep practice. So if I were working with you, John, in a one-to-one coaching session, I could give you all of those in those 2 hours we're spending together. But I couldn't do it when we're not together, which is the majority of the time, right? You leave with a fuzzy memory, and anybody that's coached a sport knows when the person comes back after a week or two, it's like, well, what'd you practice? Well, I don't, right? So it's always this 2-step forwards, maybe even 4-step backward kind of thing that you're navigating forever and ever. So I quickly realized that I couldn't create this perfect learning environment outside of my in-person time. So what can we do? And I was burning out sending messages back and forth. It just wasn't working. So reading that book and having the experience, and then also being an entrepreneur and my family owning restaurants, and I've just been in this entrepreneurial space for a long time, I thought, well, I'm really pissed off. This isn't working. If I can fix it, then there's probably a lot of other coaches that have the same issue. So it started with me, but because I collaborated with mental trainers and fitness trainers, it quickly went to other sports, which was the full intention. It was never meant to be just a golf thing, especially because I'm pulling these other experts in to help with my athletes. So it's immediately not a golf thing if you look at it that way, right?
So the customer was the coach.
The customer was and still is, even today, 13 years later, the coach. The shortest version of all of this to get to the end, and then we can work our way back however you want, is luckily I had some brilliant co-founders, people that knew how to build companies and technology. I did not. I was just a golf coach. But I was user number one, which I think is imperative for anybody starting a business. You got to be solving the pain that you know best, which I did. We built some early prototypes, raised capital from my students, which I think was a big win for me, right? That I was coaching golf and not, let's say, inner city basketball or something. It was like really safe for me to be able to raise some capital from some wealthy folks that believed in this. And then we built it out, got some customers, raised some venture capital along the way. We got acquired for the first time in 2017. And then that combined company again got acquired in 2024. And then I exited about 6 months ago from when we're recording now. So in all in, it was from the startup land, it was probably, a 13-year journey or so.
Hey, it's John. Look, if you're building to sell, I want to let you know about a resource you may find helpful. It's called the Value Builder Score, and it will evaluate your company in the same way that acquirers will look at your business. It'll give you a score on the 8 factors that drive the value of your company. You'll also get an estimate of value and things you could do to improve that value over time. Whether you want to sell now or in a decade from now, knowing how the movie ends, I think, puts you in the catbird's seat, gives you all kinds of negotiating leverage. So it's available exclusively through a Value Builder advisor. So talk to your advisor. If you don't have one yet, you can go to valuebuilder.com/score. Let us know what industry you're in, and we will connect you with an advisor who specializes in companies like yours. Just go to valuebuilder.com/score. Got it. Okay, I've got so many questions. So co-founders, like who were your co-founders? Did they work in the business or were they just like backers?
This is not the most common story, but they were actually my best friends since I was in 3rd grade. So one of them was the kid that you always knew was going to be a millionaire. You have that one kid. And this is the 1990s when we're going to grade school. He was building homework sharing websites before anybody thought that was a good idea. He did it and was making money while we're in high school, right? Doing these things. He then built the first online shift scheduling platform out of his dorm room and sold it to the companies that work with Pizza Hut and all these other people. So he's just that guy, right? And he was also adopting Bitcoin in around 2011. So that'll kind of tell you maybe where his trajectory is today. I wish I had just taken all the money I had, not built this startup thing, and just done the Bitcoin thing. We wouldn't be having this conversation right now if I had done that, but I didn't. My other co-founder was and continues, they both, which is amazing, continue to be my best friends, even though they exited the businesses early. Somehow we stayed friends, and that's not always the easiest thing. And I'm very proud of that we did that.
How'd you guys divvy up the equity? Like, do you go a third, or how?
Third. Yeah. And I felt that was absolutely the most fair, given there's no way I could take this from start to finish without them. And that third co-founder worked in the earliest days of cloud computing. So he worked at a company called RightScale, which is very different today than it was then. But really, he was helping people get onto the cloud for the first time, right? So he worked with like EA, who was trying to launch The Sims, and they went from 0 users to 1 million users overnight. Without the cloud, as you know, this wouldn't have been possible. So this is the very earliest days, which allowed us to build this without having to raise a bunch of money for server farms.
How much did
because of social and cloud?
How much did you raise from the parents? Like, I love the fact that you raised money from students, but like, what was that initial kind of nut?
It was $170K. It was the easiest money we ever raised. And I'm not sure how many founders say that on your show, but the ones I know usually say like, yeah, the first money is the easiest, where it's just an idea. It's a crappy pitch deck that makes no sense really, but it's a trust exchange and they know you and they're like, oh, I believe in this. and I want to be in early. Let's see it ride. So I wish, looking back, that we had raised more, because we could have. And I think if we had, it's just one of those dominoes along the journey that looking back, you go, well, if we had a little more, then we could have made some better strategic decisions one way or the other. Because after a while, you start kind of panicking as a new founder on certain things, especially capital.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure that we'll get to it when we talk about VCs, but they tend to be very professional money, and like the deal terms tend to be fairly tilted towards the VCs. How were the deal terms with the kids' parents? Like, was it convertible debt, or was it like equity?
No, it was actually it was a priced round. Yeah. So
what does that mean by priced round? What do you mean by that?
So we priced it at 1.5, I believe, and they bought into it, and they owned a percentage based on just the quick math of the money they put in on that 1.5. It was very simple. For anybody watching Shark Tank, it's kind of like Shark Tank deals. It's just like, here's the money, here's the equity.
Okay, got it. So they become real equity, and
absolutely. Yeah. Later we did a bunch of the other vehicles, but yeah, the early days was simple.
Okay, so the capital structure is you and your mates, and then a little bit of equity which I love. I mean, the customer.
And we equally diluted along the way, right? Just to make it fair. And we carved out an employee pool after we raised some money. We became a little more serious at each level, right? Just getting it off the ground. Yeah.
And sort of where were you at when you raised VC money in terms of like whatever you're comfortable sharing to revenue, or number of customers, or whatever the proxy you want to use for that?
Yeah. So I talk a lot about this in the book that I wrote, and with anybody that's willing to listen. It's generally, I'm a big fan, and in my experience, it's worked really well for us to have a paid beta. So I think a lot of us are afraid to charge in the early days. Maybe we're embarrassed that this thing isn't quite ready, so we just hunt for the perfect feature. Because my background was more in a business, I was a coach and my parents run restaurants. Like, well, the obvious thing to do is to sell it, right? Don't just build it forever. And again, this was 2013, 14 when we started doing this. So we went through a couple versions, then we eventually got a version that worked. We hired who is still the CTO of CoachNow today, a guy named Dimitri, who's amazing. We found him on a platform called Stack Overflow. It was a long time ago, but that was a popular place to find people. And I'll get to your question directly here, but I think this is a part of the story, is when you're starting something, the team that you build first is usually not the team you end up with, right? Because you just don't know exactly where you're headed, and you got to find the right people. So we'd gone through a couple developers, and we found Dimitri, and we had a crappy little WordPress site. Anybody building today, it's got such an advantage. Even just Wix, let alone something like Lovable. Like, we had to spin up this crappy WordPress site. He sees it, and he's from Belarus. So he's an Eastern European guy, he's a developer, but also straight to the point because of where he's from. And he says, this is shit. If I build it better in 24 hours, you hire me and give me equity. We go, okay, what do we got to lose? He spins it up. It's way better. He comes on as our CTO for 3%. And over time, he was just the best partner we could have had. Without him, it would have been nothing.
So back to the question at hand.
Yes, more directly to your question.
Yeah. Where's the business at when you decide to raise venture capital?
So we bring him on, we get a couple other developers, we start charging in beta. We're charging both coaches and athletes, eventually just coaches, but we charge both sides. And so early on, we had some of the best coaches in the world adopting the platform because they really needed it. The busy coach was the one that went, right away, instead of the beginning coach. Like, the busy coach needed this tool because I was that busy coach, and that's how I built it. And so we probably were at 100 something customers. And then each of those golf coaches would bring on 50 to 100 people, right? So you're now at like maybe 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 users, somewhere there. Long time ago, but that's roughly where we were at.
And what are people paying ballpark?
At that point, because it was just beta, it was just $10 a month or $100 a year. So nothing crazy, but a credit card on file means a lot.
Yeah. And how much did you raise in the VC round?
So we, over time, through a few different tranches, to put it in the most simplest way, it was a little over $3 million.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And that came in different forms over time, whether it be a straight priced round in the earliest days, and then a convertible note when things got a little dicey. But in total, it was a little over $3 million.
Tell me about that. Like when things get dicey, you went to a convertible. Like, just explain what you mean by that.
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest mistakes that we made, and why I'm always just like, man, just keep charging, is that, and by charging, I mean collecting money, is once we brought on the VC money, we were in that time where it was grow at all costs. If anybody remembers that, where it was just like scale, get as many users as I can and figure out how to monetize it later. That was one of the biggest mistakes we had made when we just turned off the monetization and just made it free based on the advice of the venture community. Was like, that's what you need to do. Everyone was following these trends, which I find out a lot of investors are more trend chasers than they are like stick to their guns kind of people. So we made that choice to go free. And then because of that, we had no way to cover our burn outside of raising more capital. So that's the slippery treadmill that you get on as a early founder, is that if you're relying completely on outside capital to cover your burn and your growth, then you're just going to have to keep raising money. And raising money can take anywhere from 6 to 12 months, even when you're in a kind of a powerful position. But that's 6 to 12 months that you're really not focusing on your actual business. So it's this really push and pull. It's very difficult. And even today, very difficult with the people I know that are out there raising capital. It's not easy. So, yeah.
Were you ever, I mean, so you have this super smart business guy who's going to be a millionaire. You knew it when he was like 8 years old or whatever. And you've got this great developer from Belarus who's, super smart. And the guy from the cloud business. Like, the four of you are pretty smart, pretty connected. You're user number one. Like, was there a temptation to just build a profitable business? And like,
I wish. Looking back, I wish that was the vision collectively. I think I too back then was really just believing in this. And I say this cautiously, but I think it's important. Just the story of startups is not the same for everyone. More often than not, the stories that you hear are the ones where I raised a bunch of money and then I sold the company and I was a billionaire. That's the ones that are publicized, but 99.9% of the stories don't turn out that way. More often than not, you raise capital. You went from being a solopreneur, let's say, and your own boss, to then raising capital. And when you raise money, now you have a boss because they have the money, and now you have a board of directors. You have other people that are influencing. And then when you get acquired, then you have more bosses, right? So the journey is a little bit different than I think most people realize. Like, you're not always autonomous throughout these different phases. And so I was in the track of let's grow. And we need a lot of capital to do that. And I don't want to coach anymore because it's too stressful to try to run a business and coach and raise money. And it was just becoming this thing where I felt like I needed a little security in my life. And I thought the raising of capital would give me that. And for a short term, it definitely did. But I think looking back, yes, should have buckled down and just run it as a profitable business as best we could, so that when we want to bring in outside capital, it's more fuel to the fire rather than a survival mechanism, which I think a lot of founders find themselves in. It's like, I'm so stressed out. I think if I have more money in the bank, I'll be less stressed out, which for a time is true. But in the end, your equity goes down and down and down and down and down and down. So the upside isn't quite there anymore, even after like success in the market, your wallet isn't as healthy as, let's say, the business is, right? And that was definitely my case.
We hear a lot of horror stories about venture capital on this show. One of them are these liquidity preferences. And depending on kind of the time and the vintage of the raise, they can be quite punitive. Did you experience any of that? What were the liquidity preferences?
Yeah. So
first of all, explain what liquidity preferences are for people who may not know that term, and then.
Yeah. So I think that the simplest way to put it, because I'm in that founder mode still too. It's just generally as you strike deals along the way, they're not usually going to be nearly as friendly as the first one I described, where it's just money for equity. Mm-hmm. And in a real magical world, everyone has common stock. You're all the same level on the cap table. But when you start raising fancy kind of institutional money, that money, even though it's coming in later in the game, gets preferences. And these preferences can be different across the board. So let's imagine the company goes out of business, but there's still some assets, that investor is going to be taking that money before anybody else gets it. And there's not going to be any left for, let's say, the founder. So it's as simple kind of as that. And then you can start throwing on convertible debt or convertible notes, right? That convert with all these other ratchets on them for other preferences. And it just becomes this, you keep raising money and eventually you don't even really know where you're at. And there wasn't really tools like Cake or anything else to just keep track of all this, especially as an early founder. And at that point, I didn't have anybody on my team that was super, super savvy with all of these different deals we were signing. So I think that's the biggest learning for me moving forward, is that if capital comes my way again, if I want it, then I'm going to be doing everything I can to just be completely prepared for the conversations at hand. And it's nice that you have tools like Cake or other things that you can understand where your entire cap table sits. And having a bunch of people on the cap table is not necessarily the best look, and it messes things up in a way. So when you raise from angel syndicates, sometimes you get like 25 people on your cap table versus just one syndicate. So I'm kind of bouncing around a little bit, but I think the crux of it for anybody listening and kind of taking my experience is eventually, once we got acquired, all of these other kind of preferences came along to where my co-founders actually got completely squeezed off the cap table when we got acquired. They left with nothing.
How did that happen? Like, explain
it was just
of that for folks.
It was a combination of these convertible notes that just ended up diluting so many of us to lower and lower and lower, and the new money kept coming in. And then once we got acquired, because we were in a dicey position financially, the quick story of this is that we had built a board, and one of the board members was basically guaranteeing that he would be able to get us capital. That was the reason we kind of brought him on the board. He had a big, wealthy group of people. One of the guys had committed $1 million, shook hands and said it's coming. This was 2016. Donald Trump had just been elected. And so certain political or certain wealthy people wanted to be on the good side of him, which is still the case today. And so they went, no, we can't invest. We got to give it to Donald. Now, part of that's true, but the other part is what happened is the acquiring company said, oh, no. Rather than invest in them, we should all just buy them. And so we ended up being kind of on death's door a little bit there and had to make a deal that was pretty predatory.
And so what was the deal that you kind of signed up for? And like, I'm just unclear.
Yeah.
Usually when three partners are equal, kind of three musketeers, they all get treated the same way. So it sounds like you got treated preferentially. So just walk through that.
Yeah. So I won't say them by name because they do want to remain private for certain reasons. But my earliest co-founders, the Bitcoin guy, left maybe 2 years into it. He helped us get us off the ground, and then he wanted to go more into the blockchain crypto world. So he was more of like, I'm a great friend of yours. I'm going to help you get this off the ground, but you don't necessarily need me now. And then my other co-founder, he had some health issues and some accidents along the way, and just the crazy amount of stress that we were under raising capital. He basically became a paralegal overnight and then got into a car accident. And it was just like this whole perfect storm. He left as well. So when it came down to the final stages of the acquisition, I was the last founder standing. And it was just incredibly disappointing through all the mechanics that a lot of people just the two founders especially got wiped off the cap table completely.
And so,
because I had to basically revest into my equity into this new terms.
Got it. So
yeah, I was not built to sell. How about that? I was not built to sell.
When they left, your two co-founders, like, did they forfeit their equity? Did they?
No.
Like,
so they were fully vested because we did do a traditional vesting cycle. So they invested into probably 3 years of equity, and it was still on the cap table. But this is one of those great mysteries that is super hard to explain looking back, of how all these different deals that we signed along the way and the acquisition became just kind of this predatory sharked deal, right? We got sharked. We didn't fully understand what we were signing up for. And kind of at the end, we had to sign something to keep going.
So let me see if I understand the kind of the deal. So my understanding of liquidity preferences is that, like, when an investor invests, they're like, hey, if we sell this thing, like, I'm going to get my money out first, and then we'll divvy up the proceeds after the fact, proportional to the equity share, like shareholding of each. If the company's not worth as much as the liquidity preferences, like as much as the people have invested, then the common shareholders basically get wiped out because the investors get their money out to the extent there is any money. So you guys were in a tight financial situation. So there wasn't a lot left over.
Well,
there wasn't anything left over after liquidity preferences.
Yeah. So what happens more than often, at least the people I've talked to over the last 15 years that have been doing this from the founder standpoint, right? A lot of deals, a lot of acquisitions get done and there's no cash ever exchanged, right? It's just, we're going to take on your burn essentially, and you're going to have stock in the new co. So that even happened the last time with 2024 getting acquired. There was very little cash that was submitted as the deal to essentially like bonus out the staff to stay and to pay down some of the debts, let's say. But the rest of it was, now we're getting new stock in this new thing. So a lot of founders in my case end up getting on this infinite vesting journey where companies are either being bought and sold, but not really bought with cash, or they're being recapitalized with private equity. And now everyone has to keep revesting before they actually see a dime from an employee standpoint.
Got it. And that sounds like what had happened to you. So you guys get acquired in 2017, if I've got my dates right.
Yep.
And you didn't get a whack of cash. You effectively got some equity in the company that was acquiring you effectively.
Exactly right. Yep. Which had value. But as anybody listening to this knows, equity means nothing unless there actually is an event. You go public or you sell in some other capacity. But when it just becomes these kind of like stock exchanges over and over again, which is unfortunately pretty common, then you just have to kind of keep riding the ride until something else happens.
And why did you get stock, but your other two co-founders did not?
Because I was continuing on. They were out of the business. And so I was continuing on as the face of this and the guy running it, but I don't own it anymore. Yeah, but I don't own it anymore in the strictest sense.
Okay. So they basically said we had the rights to basically get rid of all these shareholders. Like we have enough liquidity preferences to get rid of everybody.
Yep.
But we want to keep Spencer to retain some value.
Yeah. So and some of the early investors that threw in capital stayed on the table, but sadly the people that worked there got squashed.
Okay. And what about the kids' parents that did the $170,000? Did they get?
So they stayed on, but it became much of a much smaller opportunity throughout the years. And the second acquisition, they're still on the cap table through all these different kind of holding companies that ended up being created to keep that early investment group on. So my parents and a few other people are still in there. So I'm still rooting for this thing to eventually have some meaningful moment because that's where a lot of my upside is still tied. Like I left the business 6 months ago, but I didn't leave with a giant check, right? It wasn't the right place for me to be anymore. Left with something, but most of my interest is still out there. And so CoachNow continues to be the number one app in the world for what it's doing in the coaching and sports and skills space. They're investing a ton of money and energy into it. And the hope is that the collective company that has maybe 12 products now ends up having this nice moment in the next year or so.
What was it like I'd be curious to know, sometimes these things are like a moment in time. Other times it's like death by 1,000 cuts. But like, at what point did you realize, oh shit, like we basically diluted ourselves to zero here? Like, do you remember when you came to that realization?
Yeah, it was later and later because I was just so incredibly stressed out. Often you get in this survival mode and you're not looking at every single aspect. You're just trying to push forward. And because this was my dream and the thing that I built and I'm the face of it, I was like, we just got to make this thing survive. And it was my assumption that if it becomes what it can be, that everyone's going to win, which is not true.
If you build it, they will come, sort of like.
Well, if I build it and it becomes this big thing, then of course money is going to come my way somehow, some way, right? Was my naive belief for a long time. Yeah. I think it was, sadly, it ended up being closer to like 2019 after I'd been in this new acquiring universe for a little while when I started to realize, there's not going to be much of anything for me when this is all said and done. At this point, it's just a job. But because my family members and friends were still on the cap table, I felt a very serious responsibility to stick with it and get them something. And I think that's also a trap a lot of us fall into, and why raising money from anyone, but let alone people that are very close to you, needs to be very thoughtfully done. Especially, you need to make sure those people can lose that money, and you'll still be friends. Because if you feel beholden to a large group of people, your customers, your investors, your team, your founders, the stress of all of it, almost killed me. No joke. Like I developed chronic hives. I was in deep depression off and on. The journey is it's tough. It's tough.
Yeah. I can totally imagine the way you're describing it. It must have been really from what I can tell, a lot of entrepreneurs, like the reason they do what they do is the aspiration for freedom, that sense of like being able to call their own shots, not managing, not reporting to a boss, et cetera. This sounds like the opposite of that. Now you've got like venture capital overlords. Now you've got a kind of a day job boss, but none of the perks of that. You still got your parents on the cap table and all these former clients who you're like trying to do right by.
Yeah, I'd see him at the golf course when I'd go visit my dad, and they're like, "Well, how's our investment doing?" I'm like, "Oh boy, I mean,
like wouldn't I like to know?"
Hiding, I would love to know too, man. Like, I would love to know. So, I think in general, while we're digging into some of the scarier times, there's tons of positives along the way, but I do feel my journey is a little bit more of a cautionary one. Of even though the business from the outside, number one thing in the world, like I said, people love it. It's a great product. It's still going. When you pull behind the curtains a little bit more, you just need to be very thoughtful of the deals that you structure from literally day one, because eventually they come to roost, so to speak.
Yeah, let's get into some of those lessons, because I think, again, the spirit of this show is to sort of help people point out some of the unforced errors, some of the things that you want to avoid. And so we've touched on a couple, but as you think about the journey, like what are the 2 or 3 biggest lessons that stand out to you? Like that, man, I would love to have a do-over on that decision, or, that relationship or whatever.
Well, one, especially if we're looking at the lens of 2013, but with the power of 2025 and beyond. Yeah. Get your co-founder team into a spot that's strong. And we all agree here, me and you, John, that my team was probably the right team to really do a lot of things. And they were. Yeah. Yeah. Tons of smart people, a lot of grit. And we were charging. And I think that was the key. Once we turned that off, a lot of things started snowballing in the wrong direction. So like if I were doing something today, I'd be like, man, I'm going to get my co-founding team, a little bit of AI, and I'm going to get to 500K ARR before I even sniff around raising capital. Right? I'll work a side gig, I'll drive Uber, I'll do whatever to get my dream off the ground and start monetizing it as fast as possible. And we were doing that just instinctually, and I wish we had stayed with it. So that was one. And that was taking advice from the market. Like I met with very fancy people at Silver Lake and all the people on Sand Hill Road. And it was amazing how many times they said, "Oh, I wish you weren't charging because I want to tell you how to make money." I'm like, oh, man. Like, so you won't write me a check because we're making money, and then I come in later when we turn it off and you still won't write me a check?
What was their monetization strategy? Like when, obviously
it was all grow ads, grow, sell something. Like nobody had a clear path other than what we were currently doing, which is just subscription-based software, which is a no-brainer, and everyone's still doing it. But there was this, we need hockey stick growth users wise, like a hockey stick that goes up and almost backwards, and then we'll monetize it because the database is so big. Whereas I would today, and I would encourage the past version of myself to say, no, build a real business. It just happens to be in software, but like my parents own restaurants. They didn't give food away for free, like start charging from day one. And they didn't talk to fancy VCs. They got a bank loan, right? And I think today there's a lot of ways to collect dollars and build a business than just raising capital if you're in the startup world.
And what about the deal mechanics and the deal terms, given now how much you know about deal terms? Yeah. Is there anything there that you might do differently, or?
Yeah. I would definitely stay away from convertible notes or things that just have these kind of hidden ratchets in them where if things go sideways, you don't own the company anymore kind of stuff. Because then you're really panicking at the 11th hour to raise more money to keep this thing going so that you don't default into that. Obviously, safe notes are the most popular thing to do today. I have a number of friends that are currently, and some people I work with that are raising capital on those safe notes.
I think they're called simple agreements for future equity or something like that. I could be totally wrong, but I will put the actual definition in the show notes.
Yeah. Y Combinator is famous for kind of creating it as a more simple vehicle to get started. But I think just to be careful on those, I think when you put the equity to be determined later kind of thing out there, or the valuation to be determined later, you can oversubscribe these early rounds. And then when it all kind of comes to an end, you go, oh, I actually sold 30% of the company. I didn't even know it. Because you're just collecting checks. And then eventually there's a valuation there. And often you have like a 6 million cap or a 9 million cap, something like that. So then you end up giving up a lot more company than maybe you're keeping track of. So I think using things again like cake or other things just to keep a real close tally on how these decisions are going to stack up over time, couldn't endorse that more. The beautiful thing about the AI tools out there with chat and other things, like you can get amazing advice on how to structure this stuff, whereas that wasn't available back then. We would have had to hire fancy attorneys. We didn't have the capital for that. We didn't even know the attorneys that we could hire, honestly, back in the day. So I would say for me, charge, believe in what you're doing. The goal is to bring in revenue, not necessarily to bring on outside capital. Bring on capital later when it's the right time. The other is when we did bring on institutional money, I was kind of such a wreck at that point. And now I'm being told I have to run board meetings and do board decks. And I didn't even know what that was, right? What's a board meeting? You're on my board now? I didn't know anything about this stuff, right? So I made what I thought was like the best, most calculated decision, but it ended up being one of those major things that went wrong, is that I walked into our lead investor's office one day and said, I don't want to be CEO. I think we should bring in somebody that's more seasoned to help be a steward of this capital and blow this business up. I'll be the visionary of the product, but somebody should come in and be the guy. That was a huge mistake because it took me out of the room in certain conversations over time that were really, really important. And we never found anybody that was good to run the business anyway.
Tell me where this is in the time frame. So this is after.
So this would have been
to.
No, this is the very first venture round that we did. So we raised our friends and family, and then we did our venture round. So this would have been 2014, 15.
So you go to the investor and say, hey, we got to find someone. This is way out of my strike zone.
Yeah. So me thinking like that's the best thing to do. Yeah. And he honestly had said, wow, that is unbelievable. And like, I'm very proud of you for saying that, but nobody's ever said that before. And I thought, wow, look at me. Nobody's ever said this before. Well, look at me. Nobody's ever said that before for a reason. So what ended up happening is we went on this journey of trying to find the right person. We're a startup, not a lot of capital. So we can't pay probably the best person enough to even join, but we end up overpaying for somebody that oversold themselves and their ability. So we got misled, let's say, just in the simplest terms. Mm-hmm. But they inserted themselves in the business in this role. They were now representing the company in a lot of big decisions and meetings and didn't do a great job in doing so. So I had to come in and like save some of the stuff that was happening, but I didn't have the title anymore. And that was a huge problem. And looking back, what I really needed was, because my co-founders were in and out of the business a little bit at that point, what I really needed was just a really seasoned COO, someone that loved the back end, the KPI tracking, just the mechanics of being organized, essentially, so that I could go out and drive the product, drive sales, drive innovation. Looking back, that was the person I needed, but I didn't know at the time. And so now moving forward, it's 2025, I'm always a huge fan of finding fractional help, fractional experts.
Where did the CEO go? Did you have to get rid of him or her?
They were asked to leave after the first acquisition. Yeah, they weren't a part of the deal anymore.
Got it. And
it became clear that they weren't the right person.
Did you have to fire them, or did the VC?
The new acquiring company, when we got acquired, that was the deal terms was they weren't going to stay on.
Got it.
Yeah, so they got let go. They would have wanted to stay, but they they were redundant, I guess, at that point.
Yeah.
That's how they saw it.
And a lot of these VC deals, as I understand them, they don't let the founder take much in the way of salary because they want the founder focused on, the big exit at the end.
Yeah.
How are you being compensated along the way? So you're taking on venture capital. Like, are you paying yourself like a market rate salary or what?
No. Yeah. So one of the hardest conversations I had to have with myself in 2024, this is now many years later, right? And I'm trying to decide, am I going to stay on in this latest version or am I not, right? So along the way, the entire journey getting paid well below market with the goal of big exit, right? It's the same story. Get paid very little, big exit. But as it became clear that there was no exit financially for me in a meaningful way, and that when we got acquired the second time, I was still getting paid way below market because they kept selling us on this dream. It's like, well, that could be 10 years. I don't know when this big check's coming my way. Yeah. I looked back at what I was making when I was coaching golf at 24 years old and then realized if I had just kept coaching golf, I would have made more money over the last 13 years than I did in this startup. That was a hard thing to swallow because of the level of coach that I was and the way the market went. I'd probably own my own academy. I'd have some staff and be living a pretty chill life just being a golf coach. So once I realized that and realized that a lot of the people that I was mentoring that were using my product that I had built, so golf coaches, tennis coaches were coming to we built education courses and some other things around the business of coaching. They went from making 50 grand to making 300 grand, 400 grand. Some were millionaires as a result of my advice and tools that I built. I go, wow, a lot of our users are making way more money than me. So this isn't really penciling out either. So that was a hard lesson. I do think the lessons are worth a lot of money, of course. And I'm thrilled that I get to share it with people to hopefully share the battle scars a little bit so they don't have to have them, right? But it's not, it's just not always a straight line along this journey. And I think far too often we're all sold, raise money, get acquired. It's like straight shot. It's, as you know, it's not that. There's lots of twists and turns.
Did you ever go to the VCs or the acquirers, depending on where in the timeline you were, and kind of hold them hostage saying, hey, I know this product. I know the coaches. I know everything about this product, but I'm not prepared to work for free anymore. Did you ever kind of force their hand and have that conversation?
Boy, that would have been nice. I think the unfortunate reality, and I've heard this story many times and I lived it, is that often when you get acquired, whoever is the acquiring person just assumes they know more because they're the ones that bought you. So for about 3 years, I was on the back of the bus on the first acquisition. They came in and said, we're going to merge these teams together. We're going to build these features. We're going to go a completely different direction from a product. We're going to spend well over $1 million going in the wrong direction. Whereas me and my team are like, whoa. I don't think you should do that. And I got labeled as kind of this asshole in the room because I was trying to stand up for myself and where we were headed, but just got steamrolled over and over and over again, which led to lots of mental breakdowns and other things because you're just being gaslit essentially for years and told to shut up. And then eventually they gave the company back to me, essentially, once they realized, whoops, we went in the wrong direction for 2.5, 3 years. Now you can have it.
Yeah. And so you stepped down as an employee, as I understand, in 2024 or 2025.
2025, early part of 2025. So I stuck around for a year, hoping that the vibe and just the general tone would improve.
Yeah.
But the company itself was so much bigger, very stuck in its ways. So once we got folded in, we kind of just got sucked into the vacuum. Even though the deal structure was supposed to not have that happen, it ended up happening anyway.
Got it. And so you still own a small tranche of equity.
I do.
In the company. And that's common stock as opposed to preferred.
Correct.
Assuming. So you've got to wait and hopefully the folks don't.
Hopefully enough things happen to where the common stockholders, which is the majority of the people there, end up getting something. And the company's growing and it's generally doing well. So while it wasn't the right place for me, I hope that it keeps growing and keeps getting better, especially for my parents and other investors.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. It's interesting because, I think the stereotype of investors, like equity, like institutional investors, are like, they're the most sophisticated business people on the planet. They've won the game, and they're kind of controlling the game because they've got money to invest. Yeah. The way you're describing them, though, they kind of sound like maybe not as smart and tuned in as they could have been. Like, do you know what I'm saying? Like the perception of it seems like it's different than reality.
Yeah, in a non-public forum, I'm able to describe what happened a little more clearly. Mm-hmm. And when I have to other investors, they go, well, I could see how that happened, but I definitely wouldn't have done it. So it wasn't a lack of intelligence. It was more of, I see an opportunity and I'm going to grab it while telling myself I'm doing the right thing. So it's it's very tricky because I think in the end, it's business. I believe that. I don't think a lot of it was personal towards me or anything. It's just, I didn't know how to play business as well back then. Right. Mm-hmm. So I learned the hard way as well as my team. But I think I'll say it this way. I'm meeting a lot of great people that are in the institutional money world today. And I think a lot of those people were operators previously, founders, et cetera. I think when you're dealing with people that maybe inherited a certain amount of wealth or went to school, fancy school, and just immediately jumped into venture, I would maybe try to steer clear a little bit of that community because they're just they're operating out of a playbook that they're reading about. They've never actually done it. And so they tend to be really slow on the decisions, which is a very risky place for any business to just be waiting for a phone call. They tend to be a little more aggressive on the deal terms because they didn't live it before. Whereas I think when you start getting into my world of kind of the athlete performance side, when you start dealing with venture communities that are maybe more athletes, right? They've lived a grind. They get the problem that you're solving. They're not super savvy, book learned investors. They're kind of going with their gut and their wallet. I think there's a lot of great people out there now. You just gotta find them and just be careful of the ones that maybe don't bring that other stuff to the table.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And you've written about some of the lessons that you learned from this Odyssey in a new book. I feel like I have to
a lot of people are shy.
Parental guidance disclaimer when I tell you the name of the book. So why don't you sell it, Spencer, and then I won't get in trouble.
Yeah. So the title is How to Fuck a Unicorn, a cautionary guide for founders, investors, and acquirers. And the reason why it's titled that, one, you got to cut through the noise. I didn't want to have something boring. I wanted people to actually pay attention to this, at least to just look at it. But the real story is if you're in the know and you look at the cover, there's a unicorn there who is looking pretty beat up. And he's got a heart shaped tattoo saying, I love dry powder. And there's all these other things there that are kind of like, if you know kind of language, right? In the investment community. And the reality is if we go all the way back to the founding story of this, me being a coach wanting to change, not just sports, but the entire instruction economy is how I looked at it. We called it Edufy back in the day for a reason. Hey, if you're learning anything outside of a K-12 environment, this could be used, right? Because it's more of a teacher-student direct one-to-one thing or small groups. This was going to be perfect for you. So it was absolutely one of those billion unicorn ideas. And we raised money against that. But the reality is the more money we brought in, the more opinions and the more constraints that kind of came with it. And the more opinions that had to be listened to. And then as we got acquired the next couple of times, that $1 billion opportunity just kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. So collectively, we fucked the unicorn. And I'm hopeful for anybody that reads it, right? You can learn from the lessons I've shared here, plus a whole lot more, not only on just how to start the business, but eventually raise capital. And if you're going to do it, maybe do it this way or that way. If you're going to get acquired, watch out for this, or this. Also know that sometimes this happens, et cetera. So that it's just this journey of 13 years trying to distill it into the least fluff as possible. Because as you know, John, a lot of business books just repeat themselves over and over again to fill page count. I made this a very strict version in my mind, like no repeats. So if you listen to the audiobook, it's 2 hours and 12 minutes, right? It's a quick read, but hopefully it's action packed.
it's one of the most compelling cover, and I don't, it's not in front of me, so I can't rehash the blurb on the back, but it was a very compelling blurb.
So it looks like this, if anybody's watching. Yeah, it's pretty aggressive. Yeah.
Yeah. And the unicorn is hilarious because he's got a bloody nose. I noticed a bloody nose in the unicorn. I'm like, yeah, he's been punched in the face a couple times.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, listen, I appreciate you sharing with such candor today. And because again, the idea behind this show is to help owners who are maybe thinking about going through an exit, what to kind of look out for. And so that, some of the things you've shared will be super helpful for them. Is there, like, if people want to get in touch with you, are you on social? Are you a LinkedIn guy?
Yeah.
Or Instagram? Or what's your favorite?
I think LinkedIn these days is probably the best place. So it's just Spencer Dennis. I think there's maybe a couple other Spencer Dennises on there, but you'll recognize me right away, especially if you're watching this, the dude with the gray beard. And this was earned, right, over the last 13 years, all these gray hairs.
Not on the golf course. It was earned.
No, definitely not on the golf course. I wish. But I think, the kind of core lesson, I guess, if anybody's listening to this, and this isn't necessarily advice, but just, the thing that I would tell myself today, it's like, if you're the one that had the idea, had the grit and the fortitude to build it, just because you're in a new environment, don't lose confidence in yourself. Just realize you're learning on the job, but you're the right person for it. And I say that in a very, serious way, because when it comes to striking deals along the way, whether it be distribution partnerships or raising capital, it's very easy to feel like you're on the back foot. And I think a lot of founders feel that way. I know I did. I'm just a founder. I'm just a this, or I'm just a that. And it's like, no, man, and especially if you're raising capital, their job is to invest. So they don't exist without you. Just do everything you can to put yourself in the most powerful position. And often, for me, especially these days, like, your business should be making some money. So it's a simple thing, but a lot of people kind of avoid it. They try to raise capital as a form of permission instead of like as gasoline.
Very well said. And I think that's a good place to end it. I think you've done a great job of summarizing. We'll put your LinkedIn profile in the show notes at Built to Sell, along with a connection to the book, which has got a great title as well as.
If nothing else, just look at the cover. I worked hard on that, so let's just go.
The cover's beautiful. Spencer Dennis, thanks for doing this.
Thanks, John. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.